I'm starting to see a lot of posts like this, comments on my channel, etc., talking about the RAM disaster in the gaming PC market. And I partially agree with this, but partially disagree. I agree that the RAM shortage is deliberate, and I actually have some corroborating evidence, direct quotes from RAM manufacturers that do show that this is the plan. It is planned. They could increase production and are choosing not to. However, I don't agree that gaming PC enjoyers refusing to pay these prices now will save us all a fortune in the long run. And also, we have some direct quotes about when we might expect the RAM shortage to get better, again, directly from RAM manufacturers. And this could also have a huge impact on like upcoming gaming consoles, because, for example, there had been rumored specs saying that like Xbox Magnus might have been considering up to 48 gigabytes of GDDR7. That would be unbelievably expensive now. PS6 was rumored to be a bit lower, but still high. And, you know, those launch dates come in a couple of years probably. This could all be a bit of a disaster for the gaming market if things don't change. Will things change? I have a lot of thoughts, but the good news is that there are still some great deals right now, and Jawa.gg, sponsored link in the video description, will be a great place to look. Also, if you're watching this video when I post it and within the couple of days around it, there's still some epic deals of the day for Black Friday wrapping up here, and there are like really some considerably amazing options here. So check that out. But even if you're watching this video in the future past the Black Friday stuff, definitely check out Jawa. This is where you buy, sell PC hardware. You can get some great holiday deals throughout that market. You can find pre-built systems, exactly the specs you're looking for. You can shop by price. You can shop by performance in specific games. You can shop by theme to make sure that you're getting something that matches your room, your personality. But you can, of course, buy individual parts, and you can fund these upgrades by selling your old hardware, which you can do at Jawa. You can get instant offers selling directly to Jawa by clicking the Get an Instant Offer button, but you can also become a Jawa seller. You could make it a side business. There's so many great reviews, great deals. Check it out. And a huge thank you to Jawa for sponsoring today's video. You can use code Owen10 for $10 off your first purchase following the link in the video description and or pinned comment. But like I said, well, I disappeared. I meant to make this switch back to here, but I made my camera disappear. So anyway, I have that kind of power, guys. Anyway, the point is though that, yeah, RAM pricing right now, not great, but what do we know about all of this? And why am I saying that I agree that the RAM shortage is deliberate? Well, check this out. So we now have some information. This is machine learning translated. This is a Korean language outlet. I'm probably going to mispronounce this. Hankyung, HANKYUNG.com with this information. But a lot of RAM manufacturing is done in Korea, and we got some good sources here. And it's saying that DRAM supply shortage unlikely to be resolved until the first half of 2027, and that's being given as a direct quote. There's a lot of interesting direct quotes here. But again, it's saying that Samsung and SK Hynix are focusing on profitability rather than expanding supply. So again, let's dig further into these quotes. So Samsung, who again manufactures RAM, is saying we will minimize the risk of oversupply. In other words, so RAM manufacturers are seeing unprecedented demand right now because of the AI boom. Setting up all these huge data centers uses up massive supplies of RAM, but they could spin up additional production. However, if they do that, and now they overproduce, maybe the demand starts to go down, then their profitability shrinks. We've seen the RAM market go through these cycles before, where they ramp up production when there's a lot of demand, but now they have too much supply when demand drops, and then their pricing craters out, which for the end user, us people building PCs, that is fantastic. But for RAM manufacturers, they want high profit margins. So they are choosing to minimize the risk of oversupply. What they're really saying is they're not going to massively ramp up production. They'll just keep supply low to keep prices high. They're choosing to do that. And we have SK Hynix, another one of the major RAM manufacturers, saying it will be difficult to resolve the supply shortage until the first half of 2027. But there's some other interesting quotes here. But again, Samsung and SK Hynix together are controlling 70% of the global DRAM market. So stuff that they're saying is absolutely critical to what's really going to happen. And again, they're saying that the memory superboom will continue beyond 2028. Now, again, looking for direct quotes from these industries, we have Samsung specifically saying, rather than rapidly expanding facilities, we will pursue a strategy of maintaining long-term profitability. So again, they're talking about not ramping up production to increase supply to meet demand and drop prices. They're thinking, no, let's keep long-term profitability by not expanding production. They add, we will minimize the risk of oversupply through a capital expenditure strategy that balances customer demand and pricing. Now, again, they're saying that they're only able to supply about 70% of DRAM orders right now, meaning that they're just choosing to undersupply to keep profit levels high. Also, in addition to that, so what a lot of people have been saying when they're talking about things like, upcoming consoles or like the Steam machine, people are talking about why hasn't the Steam machine price been listed yet? And people saying that, like, surely Valve has locked in a long-term contract for their RAM. Well, what if RAM manufacturers aren't offering long-term contracts, at least not super long-term? So we have a company official from Samsung saying customers want long-term contracts of several years, but Samsung Electronics does not want to tie up volumes with a specific customer in a situation where prices are rising rapidly. Meaning Samsung isn't offering those long-term multi-year deals where people can lock in a good price on RAM. They are intentionally offering shorter-term contracts so that they can continue to raise contract prices every time they renew the contract, as long as the market allows them to do so. And again, they're choosing not to heavily ramp up production so that prices will continue to rise. Now, those are a bunch of quotes from Samsung, but how about SK Hynix? So we have a direct quote saying, we plan to invest approximately 30% of our sales in facilities in 2026 and accelerate the transition to 1C DRAM, but it will be difficult to resolve the supply shortage. So again, they're not being quite as overt as the Samsung quotes about choosing not to heavily ramp up production, but they are saying that it will be difficult to resolve the supply shortage. And SK Hynix is also saying that they are also implementing short-term contracts. We will reduce the burden on customers through a strategy of gradual contract price increases. So I love how they phrase that. We'll reduce the burden on customers by gradually increasing contract prices with short-term contracts. In other words, they're not saying that they're going to reduce the burden by increasing production to keep prices down. They're saying, we'll do a short-term contract, and then we'll do another contract at a higher price, and then another contract at a higher price, so that we ease into the high pricing rather than just maintaining it. So anyway, these are the direct quotes from SK Hynix and Samsung, who together control 70% of the market. So 2027, 2028, probably at least before we see the situation get a lot better, if you listen to the RAM suppliers themselves, and they are intentionally choosing to keep supplies short. However, here's where I disagree with these types of posts. By the way, I'm just choosing this one, because it blew up quite big on the PC Master Race subreddit, but there's been a lot of posts like this, where they're saying that, gaming PC enjoyers, builders, can refuse to pay these prices to save us all a fortune. But the problem with that is that, again, when you see quotes like Samsung saying that they're only meeting 70% of their, 70% of their orders, a lot of these orders are these large contract orders to like server farms and huge OEM manufacturers and things like that. So individual users, the DIY market, I think a lot of people in this DIY PC building niche really get too tunnel visioned into our niche and forget that the larger market is, first of all, for PC builds, is largely pre-built systems, OEMs, etc., laptops, those kinds of things, not the individual PC builders custom building their own PC. That is a very small niche. And then within all of that, again, when we're talking about RAM prices, we're also up against things like the giant AI server farms. Again, rather than, so yes, there's supply and demand. And DIY PC builders choosing not to buy does reduce demand, but it's a drop in the bucket compared to the overall DRAM market demand, which is largely being driven by AI server farms, etc. So it's just not likely to be the case that we can have that kind of an impact by choosing not to buy. Now, I'm not telling you to run out and buy, and I'm not saying it would have absolutely no impact. And I do agree with the sentiment that if we PC builders show that we'll pay insane prices for memory, it would mean that these manufacturers might then see if they can keep prices as high as they can for as long as they can, even if the AI server farms, maybe if that demand drops, maybe we see the AI bubble pop at some point, et cetera. Some of the sentiment in this post I agree with is that, if they see that we're willing to pay insane prices, they might try to keep them high as long as possible. Companies love huge profit margins, and they'll want to keep that huge profit margin if they can. So I do see that, but I just think that our effect on the global demand for DRAM is fairly low as the niche custom PC building market factors into that. But I do think, refusing to pay these prices as much as possible could show that at least in our segment of the market, prices do need to come back down to increase sales, and hopefully things do stabilize again at some point, even if it's years from now. And we do have some signs that that is already somewhat taking place. For example, we're seeing headlines like soaring RAM prices have reportedly halved motherboard sales, and wondering, are CPUs next? By the way, all my sources will be linked in the video description today, as usual. In other words, it's true that people who buy custom gaming PCs, if you're building a new PC, that's usually when you would need new RAM, is if I'm building a new PC, I'm buying a new motherboard, a new CPU to go along with it. And we are seeing that motherboard sales are way, way down. This is apparently as reported by board channels, so it's kind of an insider forum. But they're saying that motherboard vendors like MSI, Gigabyte, Asus are seeing a 40 to 50% reduction in motherboard sales compared to the same time period last year. Now, maybe last year we were closer to new CPU launches, so maybe it's not exactly, because CPU cycles go, in more than single year cycles. So anyway, so there's other factors involved here, but it is certainly likely that there are fewer people building a new PC right now because RAM prices have gone up so much. So there is that. So it's not like we can't have any effect on that market. But again, RAM prices aren't the only thing going into building PCs, though. So it's also possible that people are willing to pay, so RAM prices went up, but GPU prices went down. So I can overall build my PC for about the same price as last year. That's certainly a thing. Although while GPU prices are the best right now that they've been all year, that's likely to be changing due to this RAM pricing issues. The latest rumor from the NVIDIA side, and again, these aren't official announcements. These are kind of rumors swirling within the AI, BAIC partners, kind of leaking information out. The latest rumor is that NVIDIA is no longer bundling memory with its GPUs, which is going to squeeze the smaller board partners. So again, a reminder of how, the graphics card you buy actually, comes to you. NVIDIA does make their own Founders Editions, but that's a very small part of the market. For the most part, they're selling the GPU chip along with the VRAM to partners like MSI, Asus, Gigabyte, etc. And those companies have to buy from NVIDIA or AMD, if we're talking the AMD side, and they buy the GPU chip and the RAM together, the VRAM together, and then they manufacture the PCB board and the cooler, and then you buy it from that company. And those companies like MSI, Asus, etc., those board partners have very small profit margins, very, very small. Nothing like the huge profit margins that AMD and NVIDIA get when they actually sell that GPU and VRAM to the add-in board or add-in card partner. Now, the rumor here is that NVIDIA won't be bundling the memory with the GPUs anymore, which would mean that those board partners would have to source those memory contracts themselves. And as we've already seen, direct quotes from Samsung, et cetera, saying that they're trying to do short-term contracts and steadily increase those contract prices over time. That could, again, put a lot of pressure on those board manufacturers to where maybe NVIDIA can act like, oh, we're not increasing prices, we're selling the GPUs at the same prices we were all along. But if now we're no longer supplying the memory because we know it can't be achieved at the same price, at least without hurting our margins, so now they're going to pass that on. Again, this is rumored, but that would be then passing that on to those board partners who have slim profit margins. They would have to raise prices or they'd be taking a loss on the cards. The board partners don't have big profit margins. The big profit margins are NVIDIA and AMD. Now, we had already seen rumors, I'm just kind of restating it, that AMD had warned board partners like Asus, Gigabyte, and PowerColor that their GPU prices could be going up at least 10%, because we haven't seen the rumor that AMD would stop bundling the RAM. It would just be that AMD would be selling it at a higher price. So again, the current rumor is that AMD would continue to bundle the RAM but increase the prices, which means that board partners, like I said, would have to increase pricing. Or the NVIDIA route here, maybe they're not going to raise pricing, they're just not going to give the RAM, so now board partners are left to try to deal with that on their own. And especially the smaller partners would probably have trouble sourcing as good of pricing as NVIDIA could have, and as the bigger board partners might be able to, because companies like Asus that are huge players in the industry might be able to get better deals than smaller partners. So that could, again, be another issue that the industry is facing. But like I said, if this goes on long enough, this could start to impact consoles pretty considerably as well. Where, like I've said, the upcoming console generations, at least the rumored specs, which again, make of that what you will, maybe it's utter nonsense, but even if numbers like 48 gigabytes are complete nonsense, you would expect there to certainly be more RAM than the current generation, right? Like you would expect the PS6 to have a lot more RAM in it than a PS5. And so if prices are going up, what does that mean? Do they have to delay the launch of those consoles? Do they have to change their plans for those consoles, which is hard to do at the last minute? These kinds of things take years of development and planning. Like there's a lot that goes into these console launches. And then there's also the option of just, prices go up. So how expensive would these be? And what could the market actually bear on all of this? So yeah, we're in a rough situation here. And like I said, I think the Steam machine is facing that right now as it's launching. Like maybe they have a reasonable price for like the first quarter of 2026, but what is that going to look like the next quarter after that? Do they launch at a reasonable price and then it goes up? So that's the situation that we're in. And we're going to be seeing prices go up as a lot of the pre-built systems that are for sale now, whether that's consoles or gaming PCs, those were manufactured back when, the RAM that they sourced was probably available at a better price. But prices are like, as they renew those contracts, like we saw those direct quotes from Samsung, those contract prices are going to go up, and they're not going to give sweetheart deals, because this is another really interesting thing. Check this out. Samsung has reportedly rejected a DRAM supply request from Samsung's own mobile experience division. In other words, Samsung phones use RAM manufactured by Samsung. But Samsung is such a big company that there's the different divisions of the company are essentially their own companies that are then kind of governed under a larger umbrella, right? So these divisions within Samsung, have their own profitability targets, their own stuff. I think, like bonuses, executives and things have targets that are likely based on their own division, not like, so Samsung Memory, they're not going to care what's happening at Samsung Mobile, right? So even Samsung's own mobile division is having trouble getting DRAM supply from Samsung. That's how bad the situation is right now, because Samsung is the memory division is focused on maximizing its profitability. So why are we going to give a good deal and good supply to our own mobile division if that doesn't benefit that, the Samsung memory division? So it's really important to understand how all of this works when you're thinking about, that we as PC gamers can just refuse to pay these high prices and save us all a fortune. Samsung is rejecting its own mobile division, guys, okay? Because they want to maximize profitability on that RAM. That's where we're at with things. I wish I had better news for all of you. Like I said, there are still some great deals available at Jawa.gg. Again, check that sponsored link in the video description, and I hope all of you have a great day.